Welcome everyone to today's session on sustainable and efficient cooling for a warming planet. We'll be discussing challenges and opportunities and solutions to bring sustainable cooling on the ground. I'm very honored to be here. I'm Sophie Bordat from the COP26 Climate Champions team, and I'll be your moderator today. I would like to first thank you, the government of Japan, for hosting this wonderful event, and the UN Environment Programme as well for their leadership in raising awareness on this topical issue. As an introduction to the session today, I'd just like to emphasize how important cooling is and what it meant for us at within the Climate Champions team. Cooling today represents 7% of global emissions, and we really pushed our campaign to bring cooling at the center of our campaign, to first of all tackle these emissions, bring them to net zero by 2050 as much as we can, and collaborate with non-state actors and businesses in particular, but also the importance that it means what it means to bring a resilient future in a warming planet. So I think today's session is going to be fascinating, and we'll hear from wonderful speakers about the challenges they see, the opportunities there are. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker for today, and introduce you to His Excellency Mr. Yutaka Shoda, the Vice Minister for Global Environmental Affairs of the Ministry of Environment of Japan, who will tell us about what Japan is doing today already to tackle this serious challenge. So, His Excellency, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Thank you very much for joining this third event. We are delighted to co-host this third event at the historic COP26 under the theme of sustainable and efficient cooling. The demand for cooling is fast growing as the world is getting warmer and developing nations increase their purchasing power. The pandemic has also underlined the necessity of cooling when it comes to keeping vaccines effective and storing fresh food. While cooling technology keeps us healthy and contribute on economic stability for people all over the world, it generally relies on the use of HFCs as refrigerants, which have a very high global warming potential. Under the Kigali Amendment, developing countries will also start to phase down the production and consumption of HFCs by 2024. Nevertheless, the potential effect from HFC emissions remain non-negligible. The government of Japan has committed to reducing its greenhouse gas emissions by 46% in the fiscal year 2030 from its fiscal year 2013 level. Specifically, Japan has committed to reducing its HFC emissions by 55% in 2030. To achieve this ambitious goal, Japan enforces strict regulations on users of refrigeration and air conditioning equipment throughout their equipment's life cycle, in addition to the implementation of HFC's production and consumption phase down. On top of our endeavor is to reach the goal of net zero. We are also strongly committed to supporting developing countries achieving net zero. Japan believes in the importance of addressing end-of-life emissions from refrigerants. The key word is life cycle management. That is why in 2019, we launched the initiative on life cycle management of fluorocarbons, IFL in short. Japan and our outstanding partners have actively promoted the concept of refrigerant management, especially in developing countries. Today's third event welcome distinguished guest speakers with diverse expertise, including on improving efficiency, speeding up the Kigali Amendment, and end-of-life management. Now is the time to enhance our actions on sustainable cooling. I hope today's discussion will be fruitful and inspiring. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Vice Minister Shoda. Great introduction to the topic, and thank you for setting the scene on the challenge that refrigerant represent today for the sector and sharing the leadership that Japan is taking on reducing the emissions coming from high global warming potential refrigerants. I'd like now to pass on to Mrs. Inger Anderson, who's joining us. Anderson, who's from Under Secretary General of the United Nations and is the Executive Director of the United Nations Environment Program. So please, Inger, over to you.
Thank you so much, Sophia. And to you, Vice Minister Shoda, thank you for your leadership and thank you for the leadership of Japan. And to the distinguished fellow panelists, my deep thanks as well. Look, the purpose of COP26 is to keep the planet cool, a task at which we so far haven't quite excelled. Even the latest NDCs do not help us to catch up. We need to halve greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 to stay on the least cost pathway to 1.5 degrees of warming. Beyond this temperature limit, more than 2 billion people could be vulnerable to severe heat waves. This, unfortunately, is where we encounter that vicious circle that we have to escape. The need for cooling in our daily lives will grow to protect people against heat extremes. But the way we cool our homes and workplaces is a major driver of climate change. Today, around 10% of the world's electricity is used for cooling, but that is set to double by 2030 if left unchecked by climate change. We will see heat waves, population growth, urbanizations, and the demands of the growing middle class wanting more cooling. So friends, it's obvious that we need a rapid transition to climate-friendly and energy-efficient cooling. It's equally obvious that this transition is entirely possible. Phasing out climate warming refrigerants under the Kigali Amendment, as we just heard from the Vice Minister, in combination with energy efficient improvement, can avoid around 4 to 8 years of the total annual greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. So this is just one piece of the cooling puzzle. We can do much with smart buildings, with investing in urban infrastructure, with investing in nature-based solutions. We can transform these urban concrete jungles into urban forests, and we know that the canopy will bring the temperature down. We can mandate green roofs and walls, and we can increase tree canopy and make our cities cooler and more livable, and frankly, much more pleasant. To give just one example, if we invest 100 million annually in urban trees, that could give 77 million people a 1 degree reduction in maximum temperatures on a hot day. And while people might say 1 degree, well, when you live in a hot climate, you learn to know the difference between 28 and 29, or whatever it might be. Governments and cities can do much to move to sustainable cooling. At the national level, policy frameworks can help shift markets towards energy-efficient equipment and appliances, towards renewable-powered cold chains, towards climate-friendly refrigerants. Implementing energy-efficient regulations for cooling products in developing and emerging economies can shave off 100 billion off of electricity bills each year, and it can enhance the grid stability and reduce pollution from power stations. And it can provide reductions equivalent to 500 large power plants offline. So countries can also develop national cooling action plans to cool sustainably, including through cold chains that keep food fresh and vaccines viable, as we just heard from His Excellency, through anchoring action on cooling in their climate strategy and through smart investments. So friends, to move the cooling agenda forward, UNEP, the United Nations Environment Programme, offers a comprehensive approach to accelerate action on the ground. The cooling challenge is complex. It cuts across the interests of many groups of agriculture, health, energy, the engineering and infrastructure, and environment and industry. To bring change, we need a coordinated approach, and we need lots of cooperation. UNEP and its many partners are bringing diverse groups to the table to create this coordinated approach. The Efficient Cooling Initiative under the Climate and Clean Air Coalition and the UNEP-led Cool Coalition are supporting countries, cities, and industries to take comprehensive action, contributing to the Paris Agreement, to the Montreal Protocol, to Kigali, of course, and to Agenda 2030. And meanwhile, the Cool Coalition and the CCAC have joined forces with the Ozone Secretariat, Ozone Action, the FAO, and Italy to help nations slow climate change and reduce hunger through sustainable cooling and cold chains. To mobilize investment, the Cool Coalition started the Cooling Finance Working Group with the Green Climate Fund, the World Bank Group, and the E3G. This group aims to help countries attract finance and help build capacity in banks to mainstream investments of sustainable cooling in their portfolios. So these are just a few examples. You will hear much more today. What we need to do now is to accelerate action and bring everybody under the tent towards one vision, a vision of a world which keep our planet, our homes, our workplaces cool by combining the right technology with the power of the natural world. Yes, we've gotten it wrong on cooling in the past, but now we know the answers, and we have the coalitions and the will to make this happen. So we can and must make it right, and I know that with the leadership we will have today, we have every chance of making it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Inger. Thank you for those really inspiring words and laying out how cross-cutting cooling and the challenge of cooling is, and therefore how a comprehensive approach and real collaboration is needed in order to deliver these cooling services more sustainably. So thank you again so much to our keynotes today for having introduced us to this conversation. I want now to pass over to our speakers. So I want to welcome Yuri Osawa from the Ministry of Environment and Makoto Kato from the Overseas Environmental Cooperation Center from Japan, who will both be presenting today their findings from the resource book for the life cycle management of fluorocarbons. So welcome, Yuri, over to you.
Hi, thank you, Sophie, for introducing me. Do you hear me loud and clear?
Yes, we can hear you perfectly. Thank you.
Okay, great. Great. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and distinguished guests. I'm Yuri Osawa, as introduced, and it is my honor to have a chance to present what Japan has done and Japan's experience and commitment to sustainable cooling. It was the last COP25 in Madrid 2 years ago when Japan launched the initiative on fluorocarbons life cycle management, and at this COP, we are honored to have a chance to present. Next slide, please. Let me start by reiterating Japan's updated commitment. As Mr. Shoda, our Vice Minister, has previously mentioned, Japan has submitted its nationally determined contribution, or NDC, which aims to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions by 46% in the fiscal year 2030 from 2013 level. Japan sets an ambitious target aligned with the long term of achieving net zero by 2050, Also, Japan will continue strenuous effort in its challenge to meet the lofty goal of cutting its emission by 50%. As for the reduction of hydrofluorocarbons, or HFCs, Japan aims to reduce its emission by 55% in 2030 from 2013 level. Cutting the HFCs emission by more than half is not an easy target to achieve, so Japan is committing to employ all the tools and measures we can use. The point is that we cannot achieve this only by the phase down of HFCs, complied with the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol. Next slide, please. So in Japan, the HFCs emission consists of about 4% of the entire greenhouse gas emissions. The majority of HFCs emissions comes from the refrigerant contained in existing commercial refrigerating and air conditioning equipment. Alongside the recycling mandates of domestic ACs and car air conditioner, we install strict measures on controlling the HFCs emission from the commercial equipment. So the first measure Japan takes might be very familiar to everyone. In accordance with the Montreal Protocol and its Kigali Amendment, Japan controls production and imports of ozone-depleting substances and HFCs by setting the quota under the ozone layer protection law. We have completed the phase-out of ODS, specifically HCFC, last year, and we have started the phase-down of HFCs since 2019. And to this day, the actual HFCs quota has remained well below the limits set by the Kigali Amendment. Next slide, please. So the phase down of HFCs is going well so far, but I would like to underline that this is not enough to meet our goal. Yes, in general, the GWP of the refrigerant has started to shift to the lower and even zero in Japan. However, without any measures, plenty of existing equipment leaks its refrigerant when in use, and it will discharge its refrigerant contained in its stomach at its disposal. Cumulatively, it has an enormous impact on climate change, and that's why Japan addresses to prevent leakage, mandate the refrigerant recovery, and require the destruction or reclaim of the recovered refrigerant. We have enacted these obligations under the Act on Rational Use and Proper Management of Fluorocarbons for 20 years, going through several amendments. Under this regulation, the user of commercial LAC equipment need to report the refrigerant leakage, do the periodical inspection, as well as dispose of the equipment properly. The registered operators are the only entities that can handle filling and recovering the fluorocarbons refrigerant in compliance with the standard procedures that the government sets. Last but not least, the recovered refrigerant must be destructed, not yet. Could you go back to the, thank you. So last but not least, the recovered refrigerant must be destructed or recycled by the operators approved by the government. It's easier said than done, given the exponential numbers of existing equipment. But Japan is determined to implement these regulations strictly in cooperation with local governments who are responsible for the enforcement, and we will disseminate the information to the public so that we will be able to meet the target. Next slide, please. So I hope now you see the reason why we need to tackle the refrigerant emission from the existing equipment, or so-called the bank. Addressing the HFC bank is especially crucial for climate change mitigation, not only in Japan, but in every country. As the demand for cooling rises globally, we expect a dramatic increase in refrigerant demand and consumption. One study suggests that even with the full compliance of Kigali Amendment, the HFC's emission is expected to increase about 2 billion tons CO2 equivalent in the later 2030s. That clearly tells why we need to address the HFC ban, and we need to do this in a comprehensive manner. Japan calls for worldwide action on the life cycle management of fluorocarbons. Life cycle management means a holistic approach in reducing the HFC's emissions, including reducing consumption, blocking leakage, in use, recovering the refrigerant, and destruction or recycling of the refrigerants. Next slide, please. So to raise awareness internationally, Japan has launched the initiative on fluorocarbons life cycle management at the last COP. As I mentioned, Japan has been actively working with the partners, including developing countries, developed nations, international organizations, and private sectors. The picture on the left side shows the signing ceremony between Vietnam and Japan to join initiative. We are currently cooperating to strengthen policy in Vietnam, which might be addressed later by Dr. Fui in this side event. We also offer capacity building training on refrigerant management for policymakers and technicians. Moreover, Japan has initiated the Joint Credit Mechanism project installing and operating F-gas destruction facilities in Thailand and Vietnam. Next slide, please. So this is a short summary of Japan's action to address HFC's ban. Japan believes that we can do more to suppress the HFC's emission as the issue is getting hotter and non-negligible for many countries. Japan will keep committing to raising awareness on the life cycle management of fluorocarbons. And with that, we are very happy to share that our initiatives activities will be more interconnected with the climate and clean air coalitions under the new cooling and HFC's hub that will start working in a few months. Japan is confident that we will be able to reach out to more countries and regions, and we will deepen our collaboration with the new framework. So now I'd like to invite Mr. Kato to introduce our first collaboration work between the CCAC and our initiative, which is publishing the resource book. So that's all for my presentation, and I will pass it to Kato-san. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. My name is Makoto Kato. As introduced by Yurie-san from Tokyo, I am very happy to speak to our new activities. Actually, the first activity about the resource book for the life cycle management of fluorocarbons. May I have the presentation on the screen, please? So the draft resource book for the life cycle management of fluorocarbons are being drafted. And now I'm happy to say this has been already circulated among stakeholders, parties, different experts. And I have actually finished the very final draft. And then it's not going to be published through the CCAC. And this is going to be put for the actual use for policymakers. First, I would like to introduce the concept of the resource book. As Yurie-san from Tokyo, MEJ mentioned, but the awareness raising is extremely important because now the urgency of climate change and also the importance of the Paris Agreement and the Kigali Amendment target. This is actually very important policy goals. And it is countries' responsibility that we are going to operationalize that policy goals within the domestic policy realms, so that we are actually promoting the country's efforts to domesticate their international norms into domestic policies and measures. And now it is very important to showcase the good practices that are useful for the strengthening this kind of efforts in life cycle management concept. Yes, so that we are actually promoting the replication by providing hints. Now, if you see the policy measures of life cycle management of fluorocarbons, some countries actually introduce the standards or regulation and banning, and some other countries actually introduce financial and also fiscal instruments. And also transparency and tracking are also useful, and some others actually will develop in partnership with the private sector or technical experts, certification and licensing schemes. So all these efforts, good practices, I would say more than 25 cases are in practice are actually showcased in this resource book. And also some countries, both from developing and developed countries, are in efforts to replicate those things. And I think the efforts were coming from the CCAC's new strategy, Strategy 2030, and the engagement strategy for the cooling. This is what we see as important vehicle for us to disseminate this kind of information and also harness country to country and also business to business cooperation. What you see on the screen is actually one of the example of this resource book. As I mentioned, more than 25 cases are diagnosed, and then it is shown like this. So we have a project or like a schemes, or also we see different life cycles. For example, like a production or import of refrigerants, or like a collection, and also recycling or destructions. These are actually nicely laid out in this resource book. And then you can see summary of policies and also diagram of policies, and also hints for why these countries are successful in implementing and actually raising ambitious target of refrigerants, fluorocarbons management, as part of the Kigali Amendment, but also as part of the Paris Agreement. So I think this is a really good showcase for all the policymakers and then practitioners. Now the draft resource book is about to finish, but before that, we are happy to also invite comments and also some voice to strengthen our lifecycle management. And now it's available, it's uploaded on the OECC website, so you're welcome to participate with this kind of joint collaboration under the CCAC. And also, we have come up with the very nice diagram, infographic of introducing life cycle management of fluorocarbons and refrigerants, both contributing to the climate change mitigation, but also ozone layer protection. So we're happy to work with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Makoto. Thank you, Yuri, for this great presentation and sharing the initial findings of the resource book and the importance of life cycle management of HFCs. I really like the hints for success and tips for policymakers to think about and introduce in the formulation of their policies. So I'd like now to welcome our panelists for today's discussion. We'll hear more about what's happening in Vietnam, Rwanda, and Athens. So great diversity here of experiences in terms of building a more kind of cooling, resilient, and sort of sustainable cooling world across these geographies. So I'll introduce the panelists before we dive into the discussion. So welcome Luong Quang Huy, Head of Climate Change Mitigation Division of the Department of Climate Change at the Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment of Vietnam. I'd also like to welcome Faustin Munyazikwe, who's here as the Deputy Director General of Rwanda Environment Management Authority of the Ministry of Environment of Rwanda. And then virtually, we're joined by Leonie Mirivili, who's a senior advisor for the Astor Rockefeller Resilience Center of the Atlantic Council and is also the City of Athens Chief Heat Officer. So welcome to you all, and I'll start the panel now. I'd like to start the conversation with you, Mr. Hui. Vietnam has recently introduced action on cooling in its enhanced NDC. Could you tell us a bit about this enhancement and why action on cooling is key for Vietnam in delivering their climate targets? And what steps are you looking to implement to meet your commitments against your NDCs?
Thank you very much. My name is Le Quang Huy from Vietnam, and I'm happy to share with you our progress in management of F-gas in Vietnam, and recently with a new commitment to achieve our targets to net zero by 2050, and also other efforts to reduce GHG emission, particularly in represent the cooling industry. May I have the presentation, please? First of all, I would like to talk about the overview of what are the uses of F-gas in Vietnam, which is mostly in the cooling industry in Vietnam, both at the industrial level and also household level. And secondly, that while with the changes of the law on environmental protection that's recently been passed last year in 2020, and also other bylaw documents that are going to be issued very soon, within a couple of months, or maximum by the next 6 months, that to guide the implementation of the law on environmental protection, we will have quite significant effects on the management of F-gas in Vietnam. And the third one is about the ways forward, what we're going to do to achieve, to contribute for industrial cooling industry to contribute to the NDC implementation in Vietnam. First of all, is that for the sector growth in Vietnam is quite rapidly. I would say that while the development and growth of the RAC sector, especially for air conditioning, has been largely driven by the Vietnam rapid development with the increasing income increase and the demand from the households for the AC in Vietnam, that led us to become the second largest country to consume the AC in Vietnam. And of course, because of our geographic and climatic conditions and getting hotter and hotter compared to before, about 10-20 years before, the demand for air conditioning and also other cooling machines is actually increasing quite significantly. You can see that in for the market in Vietnam here, that while it's continuously increasing during the period from 2011 to 2019, during that time, the economy is also booming, except for the last year when we have to suffer from the COVID-19 pandemic. And noticeably, in 2019, there's more than 2.5 million units sold in Vietnam, which is quite significant compared to other countries in Vietnam. And the majority are the conditioners with a small cooling capacity used at the household level. And with the increasing of the urbanization in Vietnam, especially in Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City, the two mega cities in Vietnam, that the consumption of AC unit for the building is quite large. And the market share is dominated by big manufacturers like Daikin, LG, Panasonic, and some others in Vietnam. The household market has been also got a high growth rate from 10 and 12%, and expect to increase larger and higher. And the use of HFC is increasing rapidly, and because of the technology in air conditioning is also increased. And we will become probably the largest HFC consuming countries in the Southeast Asia region after Thailand and Indonesia. With the household freeze, mainly using HFC 134A, but the commercial freeze system are old type, using HFC 22, HFC 134A, HFC 404, 507, and 407AF, and those are used in mainly industrial sector, and especially the most it would be in the seafood processing, which is actually one of the fast developing sectors in Vietnam, and about 25% of total freezer system are using HFC 22 and 75% NGS3, and 40% cold storage capacity operating on HCFC 22, HCFC 404, and 507. For the freeze consumption in Vietnam, the HFC 22, that's quite constantly increasing at the average of 3.5 million tons, and the consumption FSC from Vietnam from 2011 to 2017 got an average speed of 28% of that, which is actually quite large. And the total HFC in 11 is only about more than 500 tons, but in 2017 and 2019 is more than 2,300 ton, and that is the amount that we going to reduce. But there's the major changes in the past few years since we joined the Montreal Protocol and Vienna Convention, that we have issued a number of policies to regulate the use of F-gas in Vietnam, but it's mostly focused on the ozone depletion substances. And until 2016, when the Kigali Amendment introduced, and we approved the Kigali Amendment by 2019, and actually it's quite a good timing with the Paris Agreement that's approved by 2016 in Vietnam. We realized that the HFC got a very high potential to reduce GHG emission in Vietnam, so that is the fundamental change in Vietnam, and that why in 2020, last year, that the law environmental protection is been issued, and with a dedicated article 92 on the law to provide the regulations mandatory for HFC consumption in Vietnam. So the law requires a number of responsibilities by organization and individuals that will also provide the responsibility mandatory for producer and importer equipments, and producer and importers of the control substances. The substances are under the Montreal Protocol and also Kigali Amendment as well. And the owner of the equipments and containing control substances, for example, like households who are using freeze and using AC, also responsible, and the servicing units as well for services industry. And that is, well, in a way that we trying to not only looking at the HFC import and export in Vietnam or used in industrial level, but also as household level. And it's not only that those responsible for import and export, and also the use of the HFC in cooling industry, but that would be expanded to other sectors as well. For example, the building and construction sector, they will be have a responsibility to use the cooling equipments more responsibly, to ensure that what the HFC consumption would be the lowest possible. And our colleagues from other lime industry as well would be also got the responsibility to use that to implement the law under the specific guidance that will come out in the next few months. There's a few things that we need to do in the next the ways forwards that would happen very quickly by next year. First of all is the supporting for the implementation of national regulations in line with the Montreal Protocol, and of course the Kigali Amendment as well. And as a way we've been doing in the past 10 years, and coordinating with relevant state management agency, as I mentioned, other lime industry as well, to expand the scope of management and provide more technical guidelines, and building capacity to enforce the regulation, and coordinating with relevant partners to create more technical supports to different sectors and different players and actors within the industry. and exchanging and sharing information, and of course that we need to promote the public-private partnerships for it, because mostly it will be companies and private sector who are got the responsibility to reduce the HFC uses in the industry. But most of all is that the more important is that we need to provide the awareness and perception to different sectors and different actors within the cooling industry to ensure that the regulation will be enforced properly. And that is still amongst the many challenges to come, but that is what we're going to do in the short term to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Luong. Thank you for sharing insights on what Vietnam is doing. Fascinating to hear about how you've been implementing the Kigali Amendment and clear regulations that you're putting in place, but taking a step further now, focusing on how you're engaging with your industry to reduce the use of those HFCs. I'd like now to pass on to what's happening in Rwanda and hear from you, Faustin. Obviously, Rwanda as a capital is the namesake of the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol and is the first country to ever adopt a national cooling strategy. And it's now home to the first Africa Center of Excellence for Sustainable Cooling and Cold Chain. Can you tell us about this strategy and the efforts that your country is taking forward to achieve its climate targets?
Thank you very much, moderator, for giving me the floor. Rwanda, what is doing to implement or achieve its climate targets? First of all, let me elaborate more on the climate target of Rwanda. Last year, Rwanda submitted its updated nationally determined contribution, and it pledged to reduce 38% of our emissions by 2030. And to achieve this, it will require 11 billion of US dollars, but 60% of that money will be conditional, which will be mobilized from outside, and 40% will be the contribution of the government. As you all know, Kigali Amendment was adopted in Rwanda in 2016, and if this Kigali Amendment is implemented well by all countries with energy efficiency, you all know that it has the potential to avoid at least 0.4 degrees Celsius of increase by this century. So this is very important to link the Kigali Amendment and the Paris Agreement. The Paris Agreement, if it is asking us to limit to 1.5 degrees Celsius, and Kigali Amendment can help us to reduce at least 0.4, you can see the clear linkage. So what are we doing in Rwanda to minimize or to achieve the target? As highlighted, Rwanda, first of all, have developed its national cooling strategy. The cooling strategy portrays priorities of the country, what are the challenges, and what are the key strategic actions we need to take. But before conducting the national cooling strategy, we had, together in support with UNEP, we have conducted a market assessment to see what are the challenges we are facing. And we saw that we are having three main challenges. One is pertained with awareness of farmers and people who are involved in the agriculture production and post-harvesting. Second is the lack or limited capacity of cooling in agriculture, which mainly results in loss of the agricultural production. Last but not least, we saw that cooling is cross-cutting from different sectors, be it agriculture, be it health, be it industry, be it research. So those three challenges led us to develop the national cooling strategy. So in summary, our national cooling strategy portrayed the urgent needs of raising awareness from different key stakeholders, including farmers, including customs officers, because they are the ones which are dealing with the ozone depleting substances coming from outside. We don't have factories, but we are receiving from outside. Training as well, researchers who can do some research. Indeed, we worked on MAPS, what we call minimum energy performance, which can at least indicate which standards of refrigerant we can use. Indeed, the establishment of the landmark Africa Center of Excellence on cooling, on sustainable cooling, which has a headquarters in Kigali, especially in University of Rwanda, created a synergy between researchers, farmers, and industries. And we believe that with this center, it will help not only Rwanda, but also the whole Africa as a region, because we are sharing. We have so many things in common, especially when it comes for challenges on cooling. So we believe that the center will help to bridge the gap on losses of products, production in agriculture, will help us to bridge the gap in other areas we need to improve. That's what I can say.
Great, thank you so much, Faustin. Great to hear that the Africa Center of Excellence for Sustainable Cooling and Cold Chain is being implemented and is able to share more knowledge and work with farmers, industry, and decision makers in implementing more holistic intervention for sustainable cooling. So I'd now like to invite Lenyo, who's joining virtually this discussion. Lenyo, hello, welcome. You are the Chief Heat Officer in Athens, in Greece. And we've heard recently that there's been a few of these heat chief officers being appointed in different cities, I think in Miami, in the US, and in Freetown in Sierra Leone. Can you tell us about your role and how important it is, and what can we expect from you and your fellows around the world? Oh, I think you're on mute.
How is that?
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Okay. Hello, thanks for having me. It's great to be with you. I wish I was there in Glasgow with you all. The role of the Chief Heat Officer indeed started this summer with Miami-Dade. It was a collaboration that took place between the municipality of Miami-Dade and then the municipality of Athens, and then the municipality of Freetown, with the Atlantic Council Resilience Center, and specifically the Extreme Heat Resilience Alliance. So part of this collaboration is that the cities will be working and getting technical support from the Extreme Heat Resilience Alliance. And each city is going to have one person who's going to wake up every morning and worry about how to keep the city cool. how to make the city cooler and how to protect the most vulnerable populations to heat. So as was mentioned already, it's a multi-variable phenomenon to try to handle heat. It's a lot of different sectors of the city have to collaborate to actually create a comprehensive strategy dealing with cooling the city and with protecting the most vulnerable. In my mind, there are three basic categories that I am working on. The first one has to do with awareness raising and in general communications and trying to get the people to understand the dangers that heat waves and extreme heat as a weather phenomenon brings about. It's still not prevalent in the minds of the people that this is a very deadly phenomenon. So part of what we think will be a sea change in this aspect is to start naming and categorizing heat waves, which we will do for the first time. I think Athens will be one of the first cities that will do this in the summer of 2022, to start figuring out the categories of heat waves, which will really be very important for policymakers also, because then you can have specific types of actions rolling out based on the severity of the phenomenon and the type of methodology that we're trying to use in collaboration with meteorologists in Athens and meteorologists from the Science Committee of the Extreme Heat Resilience Alliance is to create a methodology that brings together meteorological data with health data, so that for every specific area or city, we figure out what types of meteorological conditions are the most dangerous, and then based on that actually figure out the types of categories. So this is we're very excited about this, and this is a very important issue, especially for people that are involved in policymaking. The second big bucket is what kind of policies can we set into motion that can protect the people during the heat wave, we have a big percentage of the population in Athens suffering from energy poverty. There is, of course, this constant kind of tension between the issue of air conditioning and trying to quickly find ways to cool buildings and cool the city so that we don't need air conditioning. We don't need so much air conditioning. Unfortunately, unlike the previous speakers, we don't have a baseline study about how much air conditioning we have in the city. So this is part of what I'm planning to kind of figure out and have a study about the numbers that we have of air conditioning units within the city, and actually the use of them, how many people are actually able to use them because of, again, energy poverty. But so there's a whole kind of other bucket with how do you actually make sure to protect the people while like an emergency preparedness plan. And then the last bucket has to do with a more comprehensive approach to the city as a whole and how to make it lower temperatures. What kind of policies can you bring about to make sure that whether it's nature-based solutions or whether it's different materials or different technologies or different ways of dealing with the buildings themselves and the type of consumption that these buildings have, so that we can make sure that we can lower temperatures. So these are the three main kind of main buckets that I'm focusing on. So the first one has to do again with awareness raising, the second one with mostly protecting people during the event, and the last one with kind of how do you design the city. And I'm now planning also the strategy, and we are all three of us, all chief heat officers are at this stage because we were recently appointed, and we are very kind of eager also to we have in our hands the Sustainable Cooling Handbook for cities that very recently came up from the Cooling Coalition of UNEP, together with several other people like the Global Covenant of Mayors and RMI. They came up with this extensive and really kind of robust approach of how to set up a comprehensive sustainable cooling strategy for cities, and how to kind of find what the specific trigger points are that are the kind of the quick wins for a city where we can really start focusing on, like, for example, when a city is planning a major development of part of it, or whether, you know, a city is updating codes or zoning requirements. These types of moments are important moments to really start putting in the type of approaches that we really need for reducing heat in urban, you know, on an urban scale, and actually on reducing the cooling needs of buildings, and finally on making more efficient the way that we approach cooling within buildings as we are attacked by heat. So this is an extremely important tool for us, and it brings a kind of knowledge and a kind of approach that I think is quite unique. So I'm hoping that starting with these three cities, but also with our connections to our networks, because most of our cities that are really combating heat are usually part of either the Cool Cities networks of C40, or part of the community of practice of the Resilient Cities network, or etc. I mean, we're in these networks that we exchange information and we exchange best practices and what works and what doesn't work in our cities, which is extremely important, because this is how we can really scale up what we're doing, and how we can really keep cities which are now finally realizing that heat is a very big problem, and a lot of cities have not been really working on issues of heat, which we should have been working on for decades now. So it's still not a priority issue for a lot of cities, and I think this last year has been, or the last 2 or 3 years rather, have been really catalytic in this realization on the level of many different levels of government. So anyway, I will finish by saying that it's a very important part of this COP. The focus on race to zero and race to resilience, which actually brings for the first time also the idea of trying to figure out how we are impacting through the race to resilience people, and how we can measure how we're impacting people. So I'm kind of very much looking forward to moving fast with putting plans on the ground and accelerating the transition to creating really a much more thoughtful and sustainable way of dealing with cooling methods in our cities.
Great, thank you, Lenio. Fascinating to hear some kind of concrete reflections of what that means at a city level, and great to hear that there's actually some tools that are being developed and thought for more holistic planning and in terms of heat, extreme heat in particular, and how cooling comes into play in this context. Thank you for reminding us of the launch of the RMI handbook, with all the case studies that were collected on experience of sustainable cooling intervention in cities. I think this panel really kind of brought the attention on awareness. Is clearly a kind of a common topic that is needed, whether it's learning better practices on life cycle management, raising capabilities within industry on managing HFCs, or raising capabilities within the farmers' communities of the potential for sustainable cooling and helping them reducing their food loss, or helping cities understand the dangers and citizens understand the dangers of heat waves and extreme heat. I think that's been really fascinating, but maybe it'd be nice to kind of lend one last question to this panel, which would be, what challenges and opportunities and solutions do you foresee for 2022? And then what is your call to action for other countries and cities to kind of accelerate this movement towards tackling cooling emissions and bringing sustainable cooling solutions on the ground? So I'd like to pass on first to you, Luong, to tell us about your thoughts on the future in 2022 and onwards in Vietnam.
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, with the commitment we made here this year from the government of Vietnam, first of all, and also with the recently updated NDC of Vietnam, and we expect that that's going to be a very comprehensive planning for all lime industries at the government level, and also the industrial sectors, commercial sectors, to develop their own action plans to achieve what would be committed within the NDC, and even more than that. And also we would expect to have the collaboration of the development partners in Vietnam, and also from other bilateral and multilateral partners as well, to support us technically and financially on the areas of work that we committed here at the COP. So we, for particular within the cooling industry, we wanted to expand the scope of activities for quite a long time already, but that is still some hurdles to overcome within the industry, especially technically, that how to make the cooling industry more sustainable and greener, and also as a household level as well. And that is the most difficult one, to improve the perception of people, of the end users, to reduce. It's not only the uses of HFC in the equipment, but also the uses of equipment themselves, to ensure that we have we can achieve what is possible within the country. Yeah, thank you.
Great, thank you, Luong. Great call for kind of households and industry to really accelerate the uptake of more sustainable solutions that are less harmful for the environment. I'd like to pass on the question to you, Faustin. So any challenges, opportunities, or solutions that you foresee for 2022?
Yeah, thank you very much. Challenges Rwanda is facing is mainly shared with most of the sub-Saharan Africa. It is pertained with the lack of efficient cooling facilities, and also loss of various agriculture products. So the opportunity I see it in landmark Africa Center of Excellence on Sustainable Cooling, which has been established in Kigali in partnership with the government of Rwanda and various academics from UK with the support of DEFRA and UNEP. So this center has the potentials of from 22 and upwards, has the potentials of bridging the gap between researchers and farmers. In Rwanda, you have a slogan saying we need to put people at the center of what we are doing. So if we are putting people at the center, we need to make sure that the center the Center of Cooling, Africa Center of Excellence on Sustainable Cooling, can be the vehicle to at least support farmers to raise awareness and understand what are the dynamics of reducing the post-harvesting losses and what are the benefits. And indeed, the center can help countries to learn from each other, because the center will be working for the whole continent, and it can help countries to share technology, to share knowledge, so that we can be where we want. Last but not least, Kigali Amendment, last month in October, we celebrated the 5th anniversary of Kigali Amendment. But there are some countries, now we have more than 120 countries ratified the Kigali Amendment. So another opportunity is that we are calling all countries which are not yet ratifying the Kigali Amendment to do so, so that it can help us at least to avoid the 0.4 degrees Celsius by this century. So it's a big potential which we need to work together, and together we can achieve, we can be far. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Faustin. Great call for other governments to ratify the Kigali Amendment and call for collaboration. Linyo, over to you. Do you have any call to actions to make for 2022 and beyond on sustainable cooling? We can't hear you, sorry.
I keep forgetting.
No problem.
My microphone. So the call to action is there. It's ringing on our ears every day. The world is heating up, and the cities are warming twice as fast than the rest of the world. And it's 800% or more people are going to be facing above 35 Celsius degrees of temperatures in cities by 2050. This summer, because of the heat waves that we had in Greece, we had an extra 2,300 people that died because of the heat. So this is like a real challenge for cities, and the call to action is to really quickly try to do as much as possible. And what I mentioned was I think it's really important to start being much more concrete about naming and categorizing heat waves. I think that is really a quick win for raising awareness. I also believe that it's very much, I feel like cities are becoming more and more connected, and more are becoming in the front of solutions of using innovation and finding funding for innovation. So this is like what I think we really need to step on. We need the private sector to be much more hands-on with cities and startups and innovative kind of solutions, so that we can find ways to accelerate the work that we're doing, and I think that's it, to accelerate the work that we're doing and really getting the dialogue happening between the needs of the cities and the private capitals that can be invested in solutions.
Thank you, Lenya. Thank you very much. I'll now hand over to Kevin Fay to share a few remarks to close the discussion of today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sophie. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you to all the excellent presentations from our country partners. We've heard about many of the lessons that we've learned out of the Montreal Protocol process in terms of the importance of cooperation. And yet from Japan, our sponsors from Japan have talked about the need in the importance of life cycle management, training the refrigerant service sector, the need to bring the private sector in to help with technology innovation that's energy efficiency, low GWP, and utilizing renewable energy. And as well, the process has also emphasized the need for access to cooling and refrigeration in the face of a warming world. Another program that we're working on under the Climate and Clean Air Coalition is the Global Food Cold Chain Council, which is seeking to reduce food loss and waste and greenhouse gas emissions through expansion of a sustainable cold chain. These things are all possible. This is a message of hope and optimism, I think, for the climate policy process of all the progress that has been made in this area that we can show to other sectors around the world of what is possible. The lessons you've heard today from Japan, Rwanda, and Vietnam outline the solution-oriented approaches that the Climate and Clean Air Coalition has been championing around the world. And nations need to work to develop their national cooling plans. And nations need to work to include cooling and refrigeration in as part of their NDCs as part of the climate process. Sophie, you asked the question of what are the big challenges for 2022? And right now, I would urge that one of the biggest challenges, the countries are listening on this topic. Everybody's listening. We're great to have, because of the progress of leaders like Japan, Rwanda, and Vietnam. But the biggest challenge, I think, is going to be finance mechanisms to assist with the capacity building for other governments to do their cooling plans and to get a handle on that, number one. And number two, financial mechanisms to help with the development of sustainable cooling and sustainable cold chain programs that can be utilized to help reduce greenhouse gas emissions, to protect the health of our citizens, and to also then benefit from an environmental standpoint our warming planet. So I think in sum, it's a tremendous positive message. There's a lot of work still to do. But I think that we have a significant head start here, and we want to continue to pursue these paths as lessons for our other governments and industry partners and NGOs around the world to help bring about the solutions that are going to help give us a greater planet and a greater existence on the planet. So thank you so much for organizing this, and again, thank you to our government partners for all their hard work.